I honestly wasn't expecting you to become from the behind of Mommy's head.
Okay. Preliminary exercises. She did her chores that morning and got out of the house with the book as fast as she could, heading for one of her secret places in the woods. If weird things start happening, she thought, no one will see them there. Oh, I'm going to get that pen back. And then, behind the high school, around the corner from Nita's house, was a large tract of undeveloped woodland, the usual Long Island combination of scrub oak, white pine, and sassafras. Nita detoured around the school, pausing to scramble over a couple of chain-link fences. There was a path on the other side. After a few minutes, she turned off it to pick her way carefully through low underbrush and among fallen logs and tree stumps. Then there was a solid wall of plump sassafras and twining wild blackberry bushes. It looked totally impassable, and the blackberries threatened Nita with their thorns, but she turned sideways and pushed through the wall of greenery undaunted. She emerged into a glade walled all around with blackberry and gooseberry and pine, sheltered by the overhanging branches of several trees. One, a large crabapple, stood near the edge of the glade, and there was a flattish, half-buried boulder at the base of its trunk. Here she could be sure no one was watching. Nita sat down on the rock with a sigh, put her back up against the tree, and spent a few moments getting comfortable, then opened the book and started to read. She found herself not just reading after a while, but studying, cramming the facts into her head with that particular mental stomp she used when she knew she was going to have to know something by heart. The things the book was telling her now were not vague and abstract as the initial discussion of theory had been, but straightforward as the repair manual for a new car and nearly as complex. There were tables and lists of needed resources for working spells. There were formulas and equations and rules. There was a syllabary and pronunciation guide for the 418 symbols used in the wizardly speech to describe relationships and effects that other human languages had no specific words for. The information went on and on. The book was printed small, and there seemed no end to the things Nita was going to have to know about. She read about the hierarchy of practicing wizards. Her book listed only those practicing in the U.S. and Canada, though wizards were working everywhere in the world. And she scanned down the listing for the New York area, noticing the presence of advisory wizards, area supervisors, senior wizards. She read through a list of the other worlds closest to her own, alternate Earths where the capital of the United States was named Huitzilopochtli, or Lafayette City, or Frankel, or New Washington, and where the people still called themselves Americans, though they didn't match Nita's idea about the term. She learned the horseman's word, which gets the attention of any member of the genus Equus, even the zebras, and the two forms of the mason's word, which gives stone the appearance of life for short periods. One chapter told her about the magical creatures living in cities, whose presence even the non-wizardly people suspect sometimes. Creatures like the steam-breathing fireworms, pack-ratty little lizards that creep through cracks in building walls to steal treasures and trash for their lair hoards under the streets.
Those sound like something in Harry Potter.
Nita
thought... The nifflers?
The nifflers. Nita thought about all the steam she had seen coming up from manhole covers in Manhattan and smiled, for now she knew what was causing it. She read on, finding out how to bridle the nightmare and learning what questions to ask the transcendent pig should she meet him. She read about the tree's battle, who fought in it and who won it and why. She read about the 40 basic classes of spells and their subclasses. She read about Time Heart, the unreal and eternal realm, where the places and things people remember affectionately are preserved as they remember them forever. In the middle of the description of things preserved in their fullest beauty forever, and still growing, Nita found herself feeling a faint tingle of unease. She was also getting tired. She dropped the book in her lap with an annoyed sigh, for there was just too much to absorb at one sitting, and she had no clear idea where to begin. "Crud," she said under her breath. "I thought I'd be able to make Joanne vanish by tomorrow morning." Nita picked the manual up again and leafed through it to the section labeled Preliminary Exercises. The first one was set in a small block of type in the middle of an otherwise empty page. To change something, you must first describe it. To describe something, you must first see it. Hold still in one place for as long as it takes to see something. Nita felt puzzled and slightly annoyed. This didn't sound much like magic, but obediently she put the book down, settled herself more comfortably against the tree, folded her arms, and sighed. It's almost too warm to think about anything serious. What should I look at? That rock over there? Nah, it's kind of dull-looking rock. That weed. Look how its leaves go up around the stem in a spiral. Nita leaned her head back, stared up through the crabtree's branches. That rotten Joanne. Where would she have hidden that pen, I wonder? Maybe if I could sneak into her house somehow. Maybe there's a spell for that. Have to do it after dark, I guess. Maybe I could do it tonight. Wish it didn't take so long to get dark this time of year. Nita looked at the sky where it showed between the leaves, a hot blue mosaic of light with here and there the flicker of sun showing through, shifting with the shift of leaves in the wind. There are kinds of patterns. The wind never goes through the same way twice, and there are patterns in the branches, but they're never quite the same either. And look at the changes in the brightness. The sky is the same, but the leaves cover sometimes more and sometimes less. The patterns, they won't let you have a moment's rest, the crabapple tree said irritably. Nita jumped, scraping her back against the tree as she sat up straight. She had heard the tree quite plainly in some way, and that had nothing to do with spoken words. It was light patterns she had heard, and wind movements, leaf rustle, and fire flicker. Finally paid attention, did you? Said the tree. As if one of them isn't enough, messing up someone's fallen leaf pattern that's been in progress for 15 years, drawing circles all over the ground and messing up the matrices. Well, what's your excuse? Nita sat there with her mouth open, looking up at the words the tree was making with cranky light and shadow. It works. It works! Ah, she said, not knowing whether the tree could understand her. I didn't draw any circles on your leaves. No, but that other one did, the tree said. Made circles and stars and diagrams all over Tallyrulark's collage, doing some kind of power spell. You people don't have the proper respect for artwork. Okay, so we're amateurs, it added, a touch of belligerence creeping into its voice, so none of us have been here more than 30 years. Well, our work is still valid and... listen, do you mean that there's, a wizard out here somewhere doing magic? What else? The tree snapped. And let me tell you, if you people don't... Where? Where is she? He, the tree said. In the middle of all those Maidstone roads. I remember when those roads went in, and they took a pattern Kimber had been working on for 80 years and scraped it bare and poured that black rock over it. One of the most complex, He, Nita thought, and her heart sank slightly. She had trouble talking to boys. You mean across the freeway in the middle of the interchange? That green place? Didn't you hear me? Are you deaf? Silly question. That other one must be not to have heard Tellery yelling at him. And now I suppose you'll start scratching up the ground and invoking powers and ruining my collage. Well, let me tell you. Listen, I'll talk to you later, Nita said hurriedly. She got to her feet, brushed herself off, and started away through the woods at a trot. Another wizard? And my God, the trees! Their laughter at her amazement was all around her as she ran, the merriment of everything from foot-high weeds to 100-foot oaks, rustling in the wind, grave chuckling of maples and alders, titters from groves of sapling sassafras, silly giggling in the raspberry bushes, a huge belly laugh from the oldest hollow ash tree before the freeway interchange. How could I never have heard them before? Nita stopped at the freeway's edge and made sure that there were no cars coming before she tried to cross. The interchange was one of those cloverleaf affairs, and the circle formed by one of the off-ramps held a stand of the original pre-freeway trees within it, in a kind of sunken bowl. Nita dashed across the concrete and stood a moment, breathless, at the edge of the downslope before starting down it slantwise. All right. This was another of her secret places, a spot shaded and peaceful in summer and winter both because of the pine trees that roof the hollow in. But there was nothing peaceful about it today. Something was in the air, and the trees, irritated, were muttering among themselves. Even on a foot-thick cushion of pine needles, Nita's feet seemed to be making too much noise. She tried to walk softly and wished the trees wouldn't stare at her so. Where the slope bottomed out, she stopped, looking around her nervously, and that was when she saw him. The boy was holding a stick in one hand and staring intently at the ground underneath a huge shag larch on the one side of the grove. He was shorter than she was and looked younger, and he also looked familiar somehow. Now is that, she thought, feeling more nervous still. No one had ever been in one of her secret places when she came there. But the boy just kept frowning at the ground as if it were a test paper, and he was trying to scowl the right answer out of it. A very ordinary-looking kid, with straight black hair and a Hispanic look to his face, wearing a beat-up green windbreaker and jeans and sneakers, holding a willow wand of a type that Nita's book recommended for certain types of spelling. He let out what looked like a breath of irritation and put his hands on his hips. "Cojones," he muttered, shaking his head, and halfway through the shake, he caught sight of Nita. He looked surprised and embarrassed for a moment, then his face steadied down to a simple, worried look. There he stood regarding Nita, and she realized with a shock that he wasn't going to yell at her, or chase her, or call her names, or run away himself. He was going to let her explain herself. Nita was amazed. It didn't seem quite normal. "Hi," she said. The boy looked at her uncertainly, as if trying to place her. "Hi." Nita wasn't sure quite where to begin, but the marks on the ground and the willow wand seemed to confirm that a power spell was in progress. She said, I don't see the oak leaves or the string." The boy's dark eyes widened. "So that's how you got through." "Through what?" "I put a binding spell around the edges of this place," he said. "I've tried this spell once or twice before, but people kept showing up just as I was getting busy and I couldn't finish." Nita suddenly recognized him. "You're the one they were calling crazy last week." The boy's eyes narrowed again. He looked annoyed. "Yeah, a couple of the 8th graders found me last Monday. They were shooting up the woods with BB guns, and there I was working. And they couldn't figure out what I was doing, so at lunch the next day they said..." I know what they said. It had been a badly rhymed song about the kid who played with himself in the woods because no one else would play with him. She remembered feeling vaguely sorry for the kid, whoever he was. Boys could be as bad as girls sometimes. "I thought I blew the binding, too," he said. "You surprised me." "Maybe you can't bind another wizard out," Nita said. That was it, she thought, if he's not one. I guess not." He paused. "I'm Kit," he said then. "Christopher, really, but I hate Christopher." "Nita," she said. "It's short for Juanita. I hate that too. Listen, the trees are mad at you." Kit stared at her. "The trees?" Mostly this one." She looked up into the branches of the shag larch, which were trembling with more force than the wind could lend them. "See, the trees do... I don't know, it's artwork, sort of, with their fallen leaves, and you started doing your power schematic all over their work. And, trees?" Kit said. "Rocks I knew about. I talked to a rock last week. Or it talked to me, actually, though it wasn't talking, really." He looked up at the tree. "Well, hey, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know. I'll try to put things back the way I found them. But I might as well not have bothered with the spell," he said, looking at Nita. "It got caught. It's not working. You know anything about this?" He gestured at the diagram he'd drawn on the cleared ground, and Nita went to crouch down by it. The pattern was one she'd seen in her book, a basic design of interlocking circles and woven parallelograms. There were symbols drawn inside the angles and outside the curves, some of them letters or words in the Roman alphabet, some of them the graceful characters of the wizardly speech. "I just got my book yesterday," she said. "I doubt I'll be much help. What were you trying to get? The power part of it I can see." She glanced up and found Kit looking with somber interest at her black eye. "I'm getting tired of being beat up just because I have a Spanish accent," he said. "I was going to attract enough power to me so that the big kids would just leave me alone and not start anything. An aura, the book called it. But the spell got stuck a couple steps in, and when I checked the book, it said I was missing an element." He looked questioningly at Nita. "Maybe you're it?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I was looking for a spell for something different. Someone beat me up and stole my best pen. It was a space pen, the kind the astronauts have, and it writes on anything, and I always took all my tests with it, and I always pass when I use it, and I didn't want it. And I want it back." She stopped, then added, "And I guess I wouldn't mind if they didn't beat me up anymore either." "We could make a finding spell and tie it into this one," Kit said. "Yeah? Well, you better put these needles back first." "Yeah." Kit stuck the willow wand in his back pocket as he and Nita worked to push the larch's needles back over the cleared ground. "Where'd you get your book?" Nita said. "In the city about a month ago. My mother and father were out antique hunting, and there's one part of 2nd Avenue where all the little shops are, and one place had this box of second-hand books, and I stopped to look at them because I always look at old books, and this one caught my eye. My hand, actually. I was going after a Tom Swift book underneath it, and it pinched me." Nita chuckled. Mine snagged me in the library, she said. I don't know. I didn't want Joanne. She's the one who beat me up. I didn't want her to get my pen, but I'm glad she didn't get this. She pulled her copy of the book out of her jacket as Kit straightened up beside her. She looked over at him. Does it work? She demanded. Does it really work? Kit stood there for a moment, looking at the replaced needles. I fixed my dog's nose, he said. A wasp stung him, and I made it go down right away. And I talked to the rock. He looked up at Nita again. Come on, he said. There's a place in the middle where the ground is bare. Let's see what happens. Together they walked to the center of the hollow, where the pine trees made a circle open to the sky and the ground was bare dirt. Kit pulled out his willow wand and began drawing the diagram again. This one I know by heart, he said. I started it so many times. Well, this time for sure. He got his book out of his back pocket and consulted it, beginning to write symbols into the diagram. Would you look and see if there's anything else we need for a finding spell? Sure. Nita found the necessary section in the index of her book and checked it. Just an image of the thing to be found, she said. I have to make it while you're spelling. Kit, do you know why this works? Leaves, pieces of string, designs on the ground. It doesn't make any sense. Kit kept drawing. There's a chapter on advanced theory in there, but I couldn't get through it all the way. The magic is supposed to have something to do with interrupting space. Huh? Listen, that's all I could get out of it. There was this one phrase that kept turning up. Temporospatial claudication. I think that's how you say it. It's something like, space isn't really empty, it folds around things, or words. And if you put the right things in the right place, and do the right things with them, and say the right things in the speech, magic happens. Where's the string? This one, with all the knots in it? Nita reached down and picked it up. Must have fallen out of my pocket. Stand on this end, okay? He dropped one end of the string into the middle of the diagram, and Nita stepped onto it. Kit walked around her and the diagram with it, using the end of the string to trace a circle. Just before he came to the place where he had started, he used the willow wand to make a sort of figure-8 mark. A wizard's knot, the book had called it, and closed the circle with it. Kit tugged at the string as he stood up. Nita let it go, and Kit coiled it and put it away. You've got to do this part yourself, Kit said. I can't write your name for you. Each person in a spelling does their own. There's a table in there with all the symbols in it. Nita scuffed some pages aside and found it. A long list of English letters and numbers and symbols in the speech. She got down to look at Kit's name so that she could see how to write hers, and group by group began to puzzle the symbols out. Your birthday's August 25th? Uh-huh. Nita looked at the symbol for the year. They skipped you a couple grades, huh? Yeah. It's rotten, Kit said, sounding entirely too cheerful as he said it. Nita knew that tone of voice. It was the one in which she usually answered Joanne back, while trying to hide her own fear of what was sure to happen next. It wouldn't be so bad if they were my age, Kit went on, looking over Nita's shoulder and speaking absently, but they keep saying things like, if you're so smart, how come you talk so funny? Their imitation of his accent was precise and bitter. They make me sick. Trouble is, they outweigh me. Nita nodded and started to draw her name on the ground, using the substitutions and symbols that appeared in her manual.
Can you pause it so I can go get water?
Sure. Oh. Nita nodded and started to draw her name on the ground, using the substitutions and symbols that appeared in her manual. Some of them were simple and brief. Some of them were almost more complex than she believed possible. Crazy amalgams of curls and twists and angles like those an insane stenographer might produce. She did her best to reproduce them, and tied all the symbols together, fastening them into a circle with the same wizard's knot that Kit had used on the outer circle and on his own name. Done, Kit said. He was standing up again, tracing the outer circle around one more time. Yep. Okay. He finished the tracing with another repetition of the wizard's knot and straightened up. Then he put his hand out as if to feel something in the air. Good, he said. Here, come check this. Check what? Nita said, but she got up and went over to Kit. She put out her hand as he had and found that something was resisting the movement of her hand through the air, something that gave slightly under increased pressure, like a mattress being pushed down and then springing back again. Nita felt momentarily nervous. Can air get through this? I think so. I didn't have any trouble the last couple times I did it. It's only supposed to seal out unfriendly influences. Nita stood there with her hand resting against nothing, and the nothing supported her weight. The last of her doubts about the existence of magic went away. She might have imagined the contents of the book, or been purposely misreading. She might have dozed off and dreamed the talking tree. But this was daylight, the waking world, and she was leaning one-handed on empty air. Those guys who came across you when you had this up, she said, what did they think? Oh, it worked on them, too. They didn't even understand why they couldn't get at me. They thought it was their idea to yell at me from a distance. They thought they were missing me with the BB guns on purpose, too, to scare me. It's true what the book said. There are people who couldn't see a magic if it bit them. He glanced around the finished circle. There are other spells like this that don't need drawings after you do them the first time. And when you need them, they're there really fast. Like if someone's about to try beating you up, people just kind of skid away from you. I bet, Nita said with relish. Thoughts of what else she might be able to do to Joanne flickered through her head, but she pushed them aside for the moment. What next? Next, Kit said, going to the middle of the circle and sitting down carefully so as not to smudge any of the marks he'd made. We read it. Or I read most of it and you read your name. Though first you have to check my figuring. How come? Nita joined him, avoiding the lines and angles. Two-person spell, both people always check each other's work. But your name you check again after I do. Kit was already squinting at her squiggles, so Nita pulled out her book again and began looking at the symbols Kit had drawn in the dirt. There were clearly two sides to the diagram, and the book said they both had to balance, like a chemical equation. Most of the symbols had numerical values attached for ease in balancing, and Nita started doing addition in her head, making sure both sides matched. Eventually she was satisfied. She looked again at her name, seeing nothing wrong. Is it okay? Yeah. Kit leaned back a little. You have to be careful with names, it says. They're a way of saying what you are. And if you write something in a spell that's not what you are, well, you mean you change? Because the spell says you're something else than what you are? You become that? Kit shrugged, but he looked uneasy. A spell is saying that you want something to happen, he said. If you say your name wrong... Nita shuddered. And now? Now we start. You do your name when I come to it. Then the goal part down there, since it's a joint goal, we say it together. Think you can do it if I go slow? Yeah. Kit took a deep breath with his eyes closed, then opened his eyes and began to read. Nita had never heard a voice speaking a spell aloud before, and the effect was strange. Ever so slightly, ever so slowly, things began to change around her. The trees sheltered quiet grew quieter. The cool light that filtered through the canopy of branches grew expectant, fringed with secrecy the way things seen through the edge of a lens are fringed with rainbows. Nita began to feel as if she was caught in the moment between a very vivid dream and the awakening from it. There was that feeling of living in a body, of being aware of familiar surroundings and the realities of the daylight world waiting to be resumed, yet at the same time seeing those surroundings differently, colored with another sort of light, another kind of time. That's very loud in my ear. Please stop. On one level, Nita heard Kit reciting a string of polysyllables that should have been meaningless to her. Words for symbols, pieces of words, babble. Yet she could also hear Kit talking, saying casually, and it seemed in English, "We need to know something, and we suggest this particular method of finding the information." And the words didn't break the expectancy, the listening silence. For once, for the first time, the dream was real while Nita was awake. Power stirred in the air around her and waited for her to shape it. Magic. She sat and listened to Kit. With each passing second, she could catch more clearly the clean metallic taste of the equation as it began to form itself, flickering chill and bright in her mind. Kit's speech was giving it life, and with quiet, flowing efficiency it was going about its purpose. It was invoking the attention of what Nita might have called physical laws, except that there was nothing physical about them. They had to do with flows of a kind of power as different from ordinary energy as energy was from matter. The equation stretched and coiled and caught those powers within itself as the words wove it. Nita and Kit were caught in it too. To Nita it seemed as if without moving she held out her hands and they were taken, by Kit, and by the spell itself, and by the ponderous powers caught across from her in the dance. There was a pause. Kit looked across the diagrams at her. Nita scowled at the symbols beside her and began to read them, slowly and with some hesitation, naming herself one concept or one symbol at a time, binding herself into the spell. At first she was scared, for she could feel the strangeness folding in close around her. But then she realized that nothing awful was happening, and as her name became part of the spell, that was what was sliding down around her, protecting her. She finished, and she was out of breath and excited, and she had never been happier in her life. Kit's voice came in again then, picking up the weave, rejoining the dance. So it went for a while, the strange words and the half-seen, half-felt movements and images falling into a rhythm of light and sound and texture, a song, a poem, a spell. It began to come whole all around them, and all around the tingling air stayed still to better hold the words, and the trees bent close to listen. Kit came to the set of symbols that stood for his name and who he was, and read them slowly and carefully. Nita felt the spell settle down around him, too. He finished it and glanced up at Nita, and together they began the goal section of the spell. Nita did her best to make a clear image of the pen as she spoke. The silver case, gone a little scratched and grubby now, her initials incised on the top. She hardly had time to wonder at the harmony their paired voices made before things began to change again. The shadows of the trees around them seemed to grow darker. The aura of expectancy grew sharp enough to taste. The silence became total, and their voices fell into it as into a great depth. The formula for their goal, though longer than either of their names had been, seemed to take less time to say, and even stranger, it began to sound like much more than just finding a pen and being left alone. It began to taste of starfire and night and motion, huge and controlled, utterly strange. Saying the formula left Kit and Nita breathless and drained, as if something powerful had briefly been living and speaking through them and had worn them down. They finished the formula together and gulped for air, and looked at each other in half-frightened expectation, wondering what would happen next. The completed spell took effect. Nita had thought that she would gradually begin to see something, the way things had changed gradually in the grove. The spell, though, had its own ideas. Quick as a gasp, it slammed them both out of one moment and into another. A shocking, wrenching transition, like dreaming that you've fallen out of bed. Wham! Instinctively, they both hung onto the spell as if onto a railing, clutching it until their surroundings steadied down. The darkness had been replaced by a lowering, sullen-feeling gloom. They looked down as if from a high balcony onto a shadowed island, prisoned between chill rivers and studded with sharp spikes of iron and cold stone. "Manhattan?" Kit asked anxiously without words. Nita felt frozen in place like a statue and couldn't turn to answer him. The spell was holding her immobile. "It looks like Manhattan," she said, feeling just as uneasy, "but what's my pen doing there?" Kit would have shaken his head if he could have. "I don't get it. What's wrong here? This is New York City, but it never looked this awful, this dirty and nasty and—" He trailed off in confusion and dismay. Nita looked around her. It was hard to make out anything on the island. There was a murky pall over the city that seemed more than just fog. There was hardly any traffic that she could see and almost no light. In fact, in all of Manhattan, there were only 2 light sources. In one place on the island, the East 50s it looked like, a small point of brittle light seemed to pulse right through steel and stone, throbbing dully like a sown seed of wildfire waiting to explode. The pulses were irregular and distressing, and the light was painful to look at. Some blocks to the south, well into the financial district near the south end of the island, another fire burned, a clear white spark like a sunseed, beating regularly as a heart. It was consoling, but it was very small. "Now what?" Nita said. "Why would my pen be in this place?" She looked down at the dark, grainy air below them, listened to the brooding silence like that of a beast of prey ready to spring, felt the sullen buildings hunching themselves against the oppressive sky, and then felt the something malevolent and alive that lay in wait below. A something